Okay, welcome to Graffiti, Archaeology and Recognizing Hidden Voices. What am I going to talk about this evening? Well, I hope that this evening is going to really to celebrate historic and contemporary graffiti. I want to explore with you how archaeology can affect our ideas of what graffiti has been in the past and is today, and potentially will be in the future. I want to specifically zoom in, if you like, to Scallon, which is the image behind me, in the Braes of Glenlivet in Murray, and see how Scallon and the graffiti there fits into a much broader range of what we call field graffiti. So it's not urban graffiti, it's rural, it's in the field, and how it fits across the historic environment. And then hopefully I want to inspire you to go and explore some of the hidden voices in your landscape. So firstly, what is archaeology? Well, archaeology traditionally, of course, is the study of material culture. It is everything from the beginning of human origins, let's say 2.75 million years ago, through to the present day. And it's about the interactions that people have with places across time and through that material culture. And of course, today we're focusing on the material culture that is graffiti. Now, archaeology is multi-scalar. It can work from everything, from tiny pollen grains to whole landscapes. There are even researchers who are now studying the rubbish that people have left in space. So there's space archaeology because that is material culture. We study everything through artistic creativity to scientific analysis as well. It is not a science nor an art, it is both, and it employs a whole range of methods and techniques and practices. Excuse me 1 second. Now, archaeology today and the archaeologists are people who want to work with other people. We love to collaborate. We recognize that there are aspects of our past that are deeply problematic. So that's both the past of archaeology and human past that is problematic. And archaeologists today recognize that they have been part of those problems as well. So part of our work now is to address these problems, learn with people who can help us to navigate the present and explore the future by learning with the past. So generally, that is archaeology, or how at least I see it. Now, what is graffiti, down to the nub of this evening? Well, lots of people have written about graffiti, and a researcher in Australia, Ursula Frederick, states it far better than I can. And she says that graffiti is a manner of performing one's presence in the world. We also talk a lot about marking and leaving marks. And again, like all graffiti and all archaeology, it can be anywhere. It can be ancient, it can be modern. It can be interpreted as art, as symbols, as language, as protest. All these things can be combined within this overarching umbrella term, graffiti. And we find it across the world. Even surgeons carve it into their patients. I don't know if you all remember that. A couple of years ago in England, there was a surgeon who we discovered that he was actually using his laser tools to carve his initials onto his patient. So, but moving on swiftly from that, we'll think of it as a performance, if you like. And there are marks that sometimes get left behind. And of course, these marks have messages and meanings, and we're going to explore some of those. Now, archaeology has affected our conception of graffiti. Pompeii is probably the best example, isn't it? Everybody knows that Pompeii is full of amazing graffiti, including some really, really rude stuff. And for this evening's talk, I decided to remove some of it because I thought I didn't want to offend everybody immediately in my fourth slide. So, as you can imagine, if you Google it, you can find lots of rude graffiti from Pompeii. But in some ways, what Pompeii has done and what some historic graffiti has done is it's fixed our view of what historic graffiti should be. But as we shall see, I want to illustrate that it is much more than just wit, like this piece, and smut, like other pieces as well. So let's look at some examples that highlight how archaeology can help us think about the issues around historic graffiti and how we could consider contemporary examples. Maze How in Orkney, here on the screen. It really is a touchstone that illustrates the significance of historical graffiti. It is a site that dates back to the Neolithic period, over 5,000 years ago. And it's a fantastic example where a site has been broken into long after it went out of use as a burial chamber, and the people who broke into there left their marks carved on the walls, such as the runes that you can see here on the screen. The markings are the world's largest concentration of Norse runes, and some of the things that, again, they say are very, very rude, and I'm not going to spell them out here. So here we have an example of a written language which luckily we can translate. But there are other examples that provide us with quite different marks, and their meanings can be equally of interest. This is an example from a house in South Lanarkshire here in Scotland. This example of graffiti was discovered on the lintel, which is the big stone above the fireplace. The house, which is a 17th century house, was undergoing a series of restorative works. So they were stripping back walls, cleaning the place. And this graffiti was uncovered. These images were found on the fireplace lintel. Now, as you can see from this picture, there was some damage done. But, of course, we have the power of Adobe Photoshop, and other platforms are available. And what we can do is we can digitally restore images. And what that helps us to do is then see the image and start to explore its specific features. Just as the 19th century and 20th century researchers translated the runes, we can begin to translate these images. Clearly, we are seeing people. The human image is a striking one, and one that we immediately gravitate towards. We see these images of what appear to be two people with rather large heads. They're wearing hats. What is happening here? Can we read the hidden messages and hear the hidden voices behind these ochre images? Well, again, working in collaboration with researchers from the National Museum of Scotland, I had discussions with the senior curator of historic textiles at the National Museum, who suggested that partly on the basis of how the two main figures are drawn and partly on the style of their hats, that the graffiti could date from the early 17th century, and therefore they could be contemporary with the house. The curator states, and I'm going to read this out, the hats have a closed crown, a broad brim that curves upwards. Here we can see it, beautiful curve. And one on the right seems to be embellished with a feather. You can just see this here. It is difficult to identify exactly what the type of hat is represented, but the drawing conforms to a broad type current in Western Europe from about the 1620s to the 1650s. The figures, presumably male, also appear to have long natural hair, which would also support the suggestion of an early to mid 17th century date, as wigs only became the norm in the second half of the 17th century. So we can learn a lot from these images in terms of being able to describe what we are seeing. But who were the people that are depicted is not clear. Whether their pose is indicative of a particular act. Look at this cocked elbow. Look at this extended arm. And it looks like the same thing is happening on this figure as well, although this one isn't as clear to see. Whether this is actually commemorating a specific event in the area, and then that prompted the drawing on the fireplace, we can guess at this. But what we can also do is we can look at images from other places, and we can see here on the left-hand side of the screen, the Cameronians, who included Covenanters at the time of the 1650s and 1660s, who were also fighting at places like the Battle of Dunkeld in 1689, and very much so standing there with an arm outstretched, holding a pistol, with their broad-brimmed hats with the feather in it, the thigh-high boots, and the long coat. Is this what we are seeing depicted on this house in Lanarkshire? So these are some of the examples from the past, and there are many, many more. And of course, excitingly, many more to be discovered. So what I'd like to do now is focus down at Scallon. Scallon and the Scallon Mills graffiti are an example that illustrate how archaeology can be used to not only engage with the graffiti, but also it can have an impact long after it was undertaken. And what we're discovering is that not only is the graffiti of significant importance at Scallon, but it actually has ripples that go much wider across the world. What it enables us to do is develop multiple narratives of the past. And that's just a fancy way of saying that there are many different ways to discover stories about the past. So there is an official narrative, if you like, about Scallon, which is very much focused on this building, which is, of course, the Chapel House, a deeply significant building. But also there are other buildings, and within these buildings, the North Mill we see here and the South Mill, within these buildings are other stories, unofficial narratives, which contribute towards our understanding of this location. And I have to reference work by Mel and Kate Giles at this point, because they really paved the way in Yorkshire in their work looking at graffiti in barns. And that was in 2010, 10 years ago now. And their work is really inspirational and well worth a look. That's Mel and Kate Giles. So let's have a look at our landscape. When the sun shines, it's a beautiful place. It is an amazingly wonderful place to go and visit, and I would recommend it, definitely. Scallon is, as my friend Sue called it, held in this amazing landscape with the hills around it. It is really, truly magical with the burn flowing through it. The North Mill here we see, and the South Mill with their water wheels, this one hidden behind the building and this one exposed externally, and the Chapel House beyond. This is a changing landscape. This is a landscape that has changed. Scallon itself has gone from being a farm to a chapel house to a heritage location. My colleagues visited the site in 2005 and recorded the buildings. They recognized the significance of this place. In, let's see, how long ago exactly, Rebecca? 4 or 5 years ago, the Tomintoul and Glenlivet Landscape Partnership Scheme began. And it has transformed this landscape. And these buildings are, as we speak, changing from being places that have maybe been a little bit forgotten to places that are coming back into view as, this time, heritage locations. So what did we do in 2016 when my colleague and I came up to visit Scallon? We were there because we were invited by the Landscape Partnership to come and explore the graffiti. And we were there helped by a lot of people from the area. And we'd like to thank you all very much for the help you've given us. Our work was initially to record the graffiti. We used high resolution photography. We also undertook some video and some other things as well. But the important things we did was we started talking to lots of people, and people suddenly became interested in what we were doing. And this was a lovely experience because I'm a bit of a graffiti geek and I didn't really think people were very interested. And then all of a sudden, you go into these mills and you see the density and the complexity of the graffiti, and you can't help but be inspired to want to learn more, to explore the past lives of the people who wrote here. And of course, part of the work that we were there helping was transcribing, actually looking at images of the graffiti and trying to decode it, trying to hear the hidden voices within it, so that there is some form of an archive. And that was started, and what that did is it enabled aspects of the oral history project as well. But there's much more to do, and I'll come back to that later. And of course, the other thing was social media. Whilst we were there, we took some photographs, we bumped them onto social media, onto the Instagram page, and people started coming back to us and talking to us about this place. So all of a sudden, this place has gone from a quite quiet place to a place where people are interested in it because of the reach of social media. So I want to take you into the North Mill, to go inside, to visit this location. Now, we have to thank the Scallon Association, and the reason being is they maintain the roofs on these buildings. And what that means is the interiors are dry. And what that means is that the timber framing and the timber work in the place is not rotting, that actually there's been a relatively dry interior environment. And that means that there's been an awful lot of preservation in this location. And as you can see here, you can see the door. Yes, there's a little bit of rot at the bottom here. It's been patched up. But look at this interior door. This is an original door from at least the 1890s. How do we know this? Because it's got graffiti on it. And here it is. And what we can see is that this is a typical example of a door that is being used by the people who are working in the mill, and they are writing specific things on the saw cut panels. Now, these panels on this door have been sanded, so they are smooth, so they are easy to write on in pencil. And as I'm sure you can see, the pencil pops up with dates. 1912 up here, 1927 here, 1912 again. So we're being able to date the door, and we're then able to date what is going on. And what we're seeing here is a micro history written like a spreadsheet. These are columns in the spreadsheet that people are keeping records in. And here they are. They're writing about, for the hill fence, 1912, 5 coils, plain wire, 14 per coil, 1 coil barbed. And then they're adding it up. And they're using this to identify the cost of maintaining the farm. They're also using it in different places for stacking up how much produce they are gathering as well. And what I'm going to do over the next couple of slides is show you some examples of the detail that we are able to explore here, the everyday workings in Scotland, which are truly fascinating. Here, on the 13th of April, 1927, they bought a plough from Sellers & Co. from Huntly. Now, whether they went to Huntly or whether the plough team came to Scotland or nearby, we're not sure, but they've got the costs in there. They're selling the old one and they're gathering the new one, and they're paying for that. I'm not sure the sums add up. I'm not sure that's important. But what we're seeing interspersed here is not only the everyday, the important things that people are doing day in, day out to keep the farm going. We're also seeing the horrendous things in their lives, such as this. In 1927, the disastrous harvest of 1927 will not be forgotten in the memory of any of us. Now, if you Google 1927 disastrous harvests in Scottish Highlands, you will see that it's not only 1927, but previous harvests have been really poor. This is a time of really poor agricultural yield. But what we're seeing here is a specific year that has affected Scotland and the Braes of Glenlivet. This is the impact of environmental stress almost 100 years ago that we are seeing writ large by somebody who probably wasn't thinking that anybody would be reading this beyond them. It's that micro history from this incredible archive that is fascinating. I want to take you into this room. This is a small room in the North Mill, and it illustrates a particular aspect of graffiti archaeology, and that is how it can enable us to understand the use of space. This is the room where they threshed corn. So behind this paneled wall are the drums that turn round and thresh the corn. You go upstairs, and in the top of this building, up here, there's another floor, and into there you feed the dried corn into the top of the thrashing machine. The thrashing machine is built in here and is still working as far as I know, and is an incredible artifact in its own right. And this is where, as the grain would be thrashed through the drums and they could check the workings through these hatches, eventually the thrashed grain, the corn would have poured out of this chute into a sack, which you would put at the bottom of this chute. So this was the hopper into which the grain poured. And this is where the densest concentration of graffiti can be found at Scotland. Every single surface in this room is covered. And this is a result of this room being relatively warm. So it's a small room, it's wood paneled, it's got one window, which is just behind where the photographer is standing. So it would have been quite dark. And when the thrashing machine was working, it would probably be very dusty. But when it wasn't working, it would be a quiet, warm space within the heart of the building. Clearly, this was the space where the workers spent a lot of time, where people stood around and had a chance to draw, to write, to note down things, to think about their lives, and to put them down, not on paper, but into the walls. Sorry, that's gone too far forwards. There we go. This is the kind of density that we see when you get close up to the boards on this, in this building. This is incredible, the density here. You can see we're seeing layer upon layer upon layer. If these walls could talk, these hidden voices would be shouting, screaming, you'd hear everything. People, animals, bicycles, you name it. They are written here. They're drawn over again and again. There's writing in the middle panel here, but it's overwritten with imagery, and that's overwritten again with chalk, with people, with faces, with profiles. What we're seeing are multiple voices since the 1870s till the present, but it also enables us to explore creative responses to these writings on the wall. What is going on? Why are people writing here? And how do we respond to these incredible images? Do we just want to be archaeologists and find out the truth? Of course, we can't find the truth, but what we can do is we can listen to these voices, we can see them, we can hear them, and we can respond to them in different ways. One of the panels I like especially are on the door jambs. And here you see on the left-hand side, the zoology of the area. We see a whole series of different types of animals represented, maybe not to scale. A mouse, a wood mouse perhaps, an otter or duck-billed platypus, I'm not sure. Is this a stoat? Is this a hedgehog without spikes? A pig, a wild cat? And so on. We see these animals appear again and again. There are different hands at work. There are young people drawing here. There are adults drawing here as well. There are these incredible images. Again, we see the devils. The devils appear quite often, and we're not sure where they come from. They're obviously from the imagination. Or is somebody seeing the devils in this landscape and they want to represent them? What we're also seeing in the middle here is the bicycle. Here we see the bicycle, and I know, Rebecca, that there is still a bicycle in Scallon, which has been restored and is available to view, which is fantastic to hear. Is this that bicycle that was immortalized, drawn on the walls, and is still being viewed today? Who knows? I've done it again, haven't I? Sorry, everybody. I'm just too quick. Okay, one of the things that's also fascinating here, because of course we are from this strange island and we are obsessed with the weather. The weather is very important. There is a proxy climate record here in high resolution written on the walls. This ranges from describing the great snowdrift from the 7th of March 1909 to the thaw on the 18th and on the 22nd, when it says that the roads opened from here to Ballindalach after a block of 15 days. This level of detail is written on the door panels again, like a database that we saw earlier. The weather reports are supplemented by the details of the events, what is going on. The weather was good, here we can see in 1911. The weather was fine, so they dipped the sheep. These are descriptions provided as an aide memoir for the writer. This is an informal diary. However, it also provides us with a detailed insight into the performances of rural life over 100 years ago. And of course, we can compare these records, these weather reports, with national weather reports, and we can see how different or similar these reports are appearing. The other thing that we should be aware of are the personal relationships that are written on these walls. So I've called them trysts, true and alternative histories. For example, here, Mary McGartland is courting with Jamie Miller. They are a lovely pair, I must say. So you have a narrator and they are observing Mary and Jamie together. Up here we see William Matheson is going to be married with Jane somebody, and there's a date as well. Now, as far as I'm aware, they weren't married. But this is where we need to be reflective of who we are in this. Why are we here? What are we doing? There are people who are still related to these folk alive in the Braes and in other parts of the world. And we have to respect their privacy and also their ancestors. So there may be raw stories written on the walls here. And this is why it is crucial that we work with local people and to be informed by them about their sensitivities. And we respect that. And that is really crucial in this kind of work when we are working with near contemporary archaeology. So this is back to the sack room. This is one of those walls where there is masses of graffiti here. The question is, how do we record it and transcribe it? There is so much here, and as you saw, it is overwritten. Well, working with local people and through the lottery-funded Tom and Toole and Glenlivet partnership, we began some transcribing. We began looking at these high-resolution images, and also what we can do is we can use software to extract different pigments in the graffiti. So I just want to show you an example of how we can filter these images. Now, these images, I have to say, are available in the National Record for the Historic Environment. It's available to any Hi.
That's it, you're unmuted, Alex, sorry. I don't know what happened there.
Don't worry at all. So let's have a look at what we can do with a little bit of digital work. And what we can do, and this is using software that is available, and you can filter images, and this really helps us to begin to hear those hidden voices. So for example, we can filter the reds out of this rather dull image.
Alex, I think you might need to share your screen again.
Okay, sure.
I think we've lost the screen.
All right. Okay, bear with me. Let's do that. Share screen. Okay, how's that?
Yeah, great.
Lovely. Right. So what we've got here is we've got the image from Scallon, which we can digitally enhance and manipulate. And here, just a little bit of filtering, we suddenly see different images popping out. This is helping our transcription process. And with a bit more tweaking, other aspects of the image become more available. So this is about extracting different pigments, and you can write algorithms to extract different styles. This is just the beginning of digital analysis of graffiti. And I'm afraid I have to say, I haven't looked into this enough. I need to do it. I need to do more of this because it is absolutely fascinating. So digital manipulation of images helps us to see features. From text to images, and character recognition software can then be used to extract data and build a data set from these texts. It is incredible the opportunities that this is providing us. So overall, what are we seeing? What is going on here in Scotland? We've got the farm accounts. We've got this amazing preservation, not only of the written histories, but of the fixtures and the fittings and the buildings. We've got this depth of information about the farm life. The recording in 2016 has helped create a resource. It is, as I said, in the National Record, and it's in the Community Archive as well. So for anyone who intends to research the stories written in the mills, there is this brilliant archive. What we also know is that the graffiti enabled colleagues of mine at Historic Environment Scotland to reconsider the period of construction of the use of the mills and put a specific date on the internal thrashing machine, and to change the listing status to A grade, which is the highest grade. So it's obviously had quite an impact beyond just being written on the backs of doors. But how does this graffiti compare with other places? And can we fit Scotland into a much broader range of rural graffiti? Yes, of course we can. And here are just some examples. When we look beyond the writing in the barns, we begin to see an extensive range of other types of field graffiti, which begin to form maybe what archaeologists call assemblages. This ranges from carvings on windows, such as those at Croik Church here in Sutherland, to the names carved on trees. We also have stones laid out like those at Loch Eribol to commemorate the sinking of World War I and World War II ships and the visitors to the area. And of course, we have the tragedies of war marked on hillsides. Not only that, we have more recent graffiti, independence graffiti written on walls. We're also seeing stone stacking appearing in the landscape, people spelling out their names here on Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, just using stones lying around and placing them. These are visitors at well-known landmarks feeling an urge to leave their mark. All in all, Scotland possesses an incredible range of markings from the past and the present. And in the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to take you into the contemporary voices of Scotland's graffiti, from tags to street art. What are we seeing? Well, we're seeing an opportunity to work with graffiti writers. These are the people who are working today, the artists who, if we work in partnership with writers to explore the meanings behind their messages, we can collaborate over shared interests. Archiving. Archiving is a fascinating area of graffiti. We have a national archive at Historic Environment Scotland, but if you talk to graffiti writers, they have their own archives as well. They have their heritage, and engaging with them and talking to them and working with them frees up and opens this space between us to talk about being an archivist, being a curator. And I just want to read you a quote from a graffiti writer. A tag, the simplest form of modern graffiti, is a writer's alter ego, a name usually chosen from a combination of favorable letters making up a word that means something to the person writing it. The tag style lies at the foundation of graffiti and is considered the first skill that a graffiti writer must master. It is not a static form of art. A writer is always looking for better spots, planning their next move, making up new color schemes, and always fighting the buff. So the important skills that a writer must learn are resilience and perseverance. It is the constant desire to see your name anywhere you go around the city, especially at new spots that no other writer has reached. And that is what feeds graffiti and allows it to progress and develop. So an example of this is how an artist can change their styles, comes to us from a Scottish writer called Smug. Here is Smug's tag. But if we explore the historic landscape, we discover that Smug is also very competent at creating a beautiful ombre piece here. We also discover that Smug is the artist favoured by Glasgow City Council to paint beautiful murals, such as this one, on High Street. So what we're seeing is artistry that often begins in the tag, but can end up on these walls, and incredible style, crafts, style, and abilities to move from a tiny tag like this to a full-scale tenement gable end. But where does this creativity go these days? Legal walls. Here you see one of the biggest legal walls in Europe, here in Edinburgh, in Leith, just behind Ocean Terminal, created a couple of years ago. It was created through hard-earned partnerships between graffiti writers, the council, Fourth Ports. And what they've done is they've created a space where people can go and develop their styles. They can explore past styles and create new ones. But graffiti goes beyond style and craft, and it has messages and meanings. This street art that we see is socially conscious. It's written on the Social Bike Cafe in Glasgow. This message that has actually transferred from an artist from Australia has now been transposed to Glasgow. And the image here we're seeing is "Keep your coins, I want change." This is activism through art. This is what graffiti can do, and we see it again and again. Sometimes it gets washed away, sometimes it stays, just like the graffiti in the mills at Scallon. So, to conclude, graffiti and archaeology, I think, and I hope you would agree, are comfortable bedfellows. By working with writers today, we can learn about the recent history of graffiti. We can see trends, hand style development, discover different messages and mediums, and begin to see the broad range of voices hidden in the landscape. In some small ways, this can help us to engage with and research the nuances of markings from the past. But remember what Professor Doug Bailey of San Francisco State University recently said. The archaeologist's job is not to discover officially and tell the stories of the past. Rather, the goal of archaeology is to open people's minds and disrupt received perceptions of society, politics, places, peoples, and material culture. So it is working with writers and learning their craft that enables us to hear their hidden voices. In a world where space is increasingly becoming commodified, we should read their art as providing a free splash of colour in a dull world, where public space is being sold to private corporations for profit and control. Maybe graffiti is one of the few remaining signs of freedom in a world that is increasingly designed to observe and control our every move. So I urge you to keep safe, but if you can, go out and explore the hidden voices in your historic landscape, and please tell us what you find. Thank you.